I'll call this April 22nd meeting of the Eugene Planning Commission to order. First item on the agenda is public comment. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to address the Planning Commission?
My name is David. I'm an environmental studies major at U of O. And this is a big kid step for me today, so I mean, I haven't really had much involvement in municipality and small businesses. It's really cool.
So you're here to see government in action?
Yes.
Oh, very good.
And this is as exciting as it
I'm
gets.
very excited. I might need a seatbelt to keep myself.
There you go.
All
We
right.
have some old business to attend to regarding the South Willamette Street concept plan. Is there a motion to add that to the agenda? It didn't make it.
I will move to return that to the agenda.
Second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Well, let me pass out. We've all had a chance to take a look. Wait, let me keep that one. We've all had a chance to take a look at the recommendations. Appreciate y'all for.
Here's the answers.
What's the difference?
This is the original. Everybody did a great job putting your input into it. Two came in after the final draft. One from Rick was, I guess, a grammatical change, and then Steve, you suggested that we split item 5. I just put it in parentheses there to try to make it a little clearer without adjusting
that sounds good.
too much. So before us is the motion that we tentatively approved last week, and then the wordsmithing of the recommendations to attach to the motion. Discussion about it? Is there a motion then?
I move to accept the final recommendations with this letter attached and forward on to City Council.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign? Very good.
Just a quick comment. Thanks to everybody for your efforts in putting this together, and hopefully it'll make a difference with council.
I do. Yep.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
That was quick, bye.
Very efficient.
All
It goes
right.
downhill from here.
I was going to say, that's how fast government operates.
On to official agenda item 2, the downtown mixed-use code amendments. Alyssa and Company.
Do you want
No.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we have about 45 minutes today to just do a review of these land use code amendments in advance of the public hearing, which is scheduled for May 14th, just to clarify that date. The goal of these amendments is to facilitate desired mixed-use development downtown, along our key transit corridors, and in our core commercial areas. And in essence, what we're proposing are changes to the land use regulations to align those with the types of development we want to see in these areas. So I have a pretty brief PowerPoint presentation for you. It's mostly maps just to help with the conversation. And what I'd like to do is kind of run through the PowerPoint quickly and then give you guys plenty of time to discuss. What you have before you is actually the code language, which is part of the packet. When I was back, when we were here with you in November, we were just discussing code concepts. And then really quickly, I have Nan Lawrence and Christy Brown. We've been collaborating, working together on the code language, and the vetting it with the stakeholders as well.
And since this is headed to hearing, that discussion really needs to focus on questions and clarifications and not deliberations.
Correct. And there will be plenty of time after the hearing, once you've heard all the public testimony, to
Legislative or quasi-judicial?
legislative.
Thanks.
All right, so real quickly today, I just want to talk about where these fit in with Envision Eugene, give you a brief overview, a high level of the code amendments, and then open it up for questions, as I mentioned. So, of course, these are related to the 7 pillars of Envision Eugene, and they're actually specifically called for as a strategy under the compact development and transportation pillar. There's a strategy that talks about making compact urban development, redevelopment, easier, facilitating that development downtown along the key transit corridors and our core commercial areas. So these code amendments are actually part of a package of strategy, including incentives, redesignations, and a number of other things that will help us to accommodate our 20-year commercial and multifamily housing need inside the current UGB. So these are the 8 topic areas of the code amendments. I'm not going to cover number 8, just so you know. That's a housekeeping measure that just basically reorganizes the commercial section, but there are no changes to the actual code languages or regulations. These came from a variety of sources, as it's mentioned in your AIS. A lot of these were collected through the Envision Eugene public process. We also looked at past downtown code improvement processes and what kinds of things were suggested there. I dusted off the minor code amendment process library and to see if there was anything left over there that could be looked at. We talked to a number of stakeholders before we started, and then also just through staff experience, what things are people adjusting, where there's some problem areas in the code. Some of these apply downtown specifically. Some of these have broader applicability, and some of them apply just in specific zones. And we'll get started. So the first one is allowing housing in commercial zones. And there's kind of 2 amendments here. One applies in the C2 zone, so the community commercial zone, which is shown in pink more or less on this map. And what this amendment would allow is housing on the ground floor in the C2 zone. Currently, you would need to provide commercial or non-residential for the majority of the ground floor in the commercial zone to have residential above that. This would align the regulations with what's already allowed downtown, which would allow residential also on the ground floor. The second part of the housing and commercial topic applies strictly within the downtown C3 zone, and that would propose to allow 1 or 2 apartments, or dwellings within a commercial building. So if there was commercial or non-residential on the ground floor, it would allow 1 or 2 units above that. Currently, you can have 3 or more units, but we have had a number of situations where a building owner has come and wanted to, say, put in a penthouse or put in a couple of apartments, or even a business owner would like an apartment in their C3 building, and that's currently not allowed as the code stands. So moving on to number 2, which is surface parking limitation. This applies in the C3 zone, which is kind of the rusty red color showing on this map. And what this is all about a parking lot that's not associated with a use on a site. So basically a standalone lot. I think we kind of call them diamond lots downtown because that's typically who they're managed by here. But currently downtown, you can have surface parking if there's already a building on the site. You can have up to 20 surface parking spaces. Anything beyond that would need to be structured, and once again, that's for a parking lot that's not associated with that building. What this would do is allow some flexibility for redevelopment sites within downtown. The proposal is to allow for an additional 20 spaces, and then as long as there's access only via the alley, and then remove the requirement that there has to be a building associated on site. And I'll come back to that one if you have any questions, because it's kind of a complicated standard. The next one, number 3, is the large commercial facility standards. These are regulations that apply to buildings that are over 25,000 square feet that are commercial. And for the most part, these require designs that are more intended for suburban development, so kind of more of your larger retailer that you might see on a single site, to name a few, maybe like a Target or a Walmart, even a Lowe's home improvement store. These typically apply pretty well to those types of development, but once you get downtown, some of the standards within the large commercial facility standards don't make a lot of sense, and they're really redundant in an urban setting. They require additional sidewalks plus an additional landscaping, which could push those buildings back an additional 14 feet from the public sidewalk. Both the Lane Community College and the Woolworth building had to seek adjustments to that particular standard. So the proposal is to exempt downtown developments from certain standards, but make sure that they would still comply with building articulation, the standards requiring ground floor windows, and a couple of others that actually make sense in any kind of context or setting. The next proposal is regarding commercial landscaping standards. And really, the goal is to better align our commercial landscaping standards with desired urban development. Currently, in the C3 zone, once again, no landscaping is required. So, if, on a development site, you would not have to provide any landscaping. In the C2 zone, 10% of the site is required to be in landscaping. And what's proposed is that that actually be reduced or dropped within the downtown plan area. And then there's another proposal that would reduce the required width for a front yard landscape bed. Currently, no buildings are required to have a landscape bed in the front yard, but if they do provide one, it must be 7 feet in depth, and it has to meet certain standards, which includes a tree every 30 feet. So that didn't feel like it was a particularly made a lot of sense in an urban context. And so the proposal there is to reduce that and potentially eliminate the tree requirement as well. The next set of amendments apply only to the nodal development overlay zone. This map shows the 4 areas where there are properties that are zoned nodal development. As you're probably well familiar, within downtown, actually only 5 properties have that overlay, but if I did that, you wouldn't be able to see them. So just know that there's 5 properties downtown. Otherwise, it's the Crescent Village area, Lower River Road, and then the Danabo area in West Eugene. The proposal here is to add some flexibility to the overlay zone to allow all properties to seek an adjustment. Currently, only a certain types of properties can ask for adjustments. And then we also would be proposing to add relevant adjustment review criteria. Right now, if you were seeking an adjustment, you would get sent to the purpose statement of the zone, which is really vague. And so rather than having people kind of trying to figure out what it is we really want them to do in this zone, we're proposing actually adjustment review criteria that get to mixed-use pedestrian environment and articulate buildings that make sense in those areas. And then there's one other small change that would clarify for corner properties about just give them a little bit of flexibility about building and parking along the street. That particular standard, as well as the adjustment review standard, are mirrored in the transit-oriented development overlay zone, and so we're also proposing that those change as well, similar to exactly as they would change in the ND zone. So, not sure if that made sense, but it basically would give flexibility to lots that have more than one street frontage and align the adjustment review criteria with the type of development we'd want to see. This is just a map that shows you where the transit-oriented development overlay zone applies. And then finally, the 7th Amendment deals with the traffic impact analysis, and the proposal is to remove that requirement within the downtown automobile parking exempt area. So that's the larger area on this map, and that's an area where proper developments are exempt from providing on-site parking. So no developments are required to provide any kind of parking on-site. And the city, obviously has a number of garages where we expect the parking to occur. But it was thought that there's a lot of unique characteristics downtown that really lessen the benefit or a need for a TIA, and those include there's already a lower allowed level of service downtown. We have a gridded street pattern that's pretty built out. We're not expecting, any lanes to be added, any streets to be widened. There's ample transit. There's already slower speeds, so there didn't seem to be much, net gain whatsoever from requiring a TIA downtown. And then just real quick, so as I mentioned, May 14th is the next Planning Commission meeting on this, and it will be your public hearing. June 3rd, you were scheduled to begin your deliberations for a recommendation to the City Council. And then later this year, either July and September, there will be a City Council public hearing, and then that will be followed by action at a later meeting. So I am, whoops, I guess that was the end. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Alyssa, Christie, or Nan? John, you had one first, and then Steve.
Well, let me just ask this question. So in the nodal development areas, would this adjustment review basically include the FAR ratio?
Let's see. Believe so, but let me just confirm that. Yes. So currently, those can be adjusted for certain properties, and this would open it up to allow all properties to adjust that.
So, just a process question. I assume we have to keep our nodes because we agreed to do that in transplant.
We currently, until something changes, and that's something that is being looked at as part of the transportation system plan update, or the Eugene-specific one, but currently we couldn't just do away with this zone without making some substantial changes to our transportation plan.
But theoretically, the FAR ratio is in there because it meets, well, I'm going to get in trouble here. We would not have difficulty in your estimation with LCDC if we allowed that adjustment to take place.
That adjustment already is allowed.
Okay. But
And
this broadens it significantly.
It broadens it. I don't know about significantly, but it definitely broadens it.
Okay. I guess if you guys are comfortable that it'll fly, I think it should move forward. I will say, philosophically, I'd rather not have it done through adjustment review. I'd rather have a comprehensive change, but
And
we'll talk about that later.
Steve?
I just, two questions. One, just the date on these code changes is April 12th. Has this changed since what we looked at before? Like when we look at with the stakeholders, same?
So the only thing I added, so we did have a meeting with stakeholders, and I believe the only thing that changed is where I added stakeholder comments at the very end. And so I will mention that we have been speaking with a number of stakeholders, and I attempted to kind of summarize those comments and put them at the end of each section here. And I think that's the only thing that's changed since you looked at the...
That was my one question.
Yeah.
The other question is regarding the adjustment review, the text that we're adding for adjustment reviews for both of the two zones. Mm-hmm. Do we have any definition of things like high-quality materials,
Yep.
pedestrian scale lighting, prominent entries,
No, and that's really, that sentence is not, that sentence talks about design elements for this purpose may include. So it's really just to give examples of what that might be.
But in practice, that's what's been used to decide whether something could qualify the adjustment.
Right. So these are modeled after the downtown adjustment review criteria, and I think Christy could speak to how those are working.
So typically, we're looking at the overall design and whether it's meeting the outcome, and sometimes materials and scale, lighting, sometimes even furniture, whether it's benches, things like that, are making it a pedestrian environment. And so those are the things we're looking at hopefully comprehensively. Those are just some examples of things that people have done, and the overall goal would be to still meet the intent of what the standards were, just getting a different, having a subjective process to make those decisions through.
So the only reason and I'm not as concerned about it in the nodal development zone, the transit zone, because they're so small, but the way this language has been interpreted in other places is it, allows you to, where you have a code requirement that says 150-foot long solid building wall, and you allow them to go to 190, just because they have openings on the front, which would qualify as prominent openings. So I just would want to make sure that we somehow clarify the language. So a building that already meets code, already meets the code requirement. It seems like if you get an adjustment, you should get something in return. So we should have it worded such that, there's something beyond what would be normally required. If you want to adjust this, you give a little bit here, rather than, you just meet the code requirements, and now because of the wording, and it's not clear, we qualify for the adjustment.
Can I respond to that?
Sure.
The goal here is to increase the expectation for a higher quality pedestrian environment. So if you can already meet the code, then you don't need the adjustment. If you get the adjustment, it is discretionary, and these elements that are included in the criteria are also discretionary, but they are examples of what has been used in other cities and here to promote a higher quality pedestrian environment. But I do agree it is discretionary. It's not something that, if we could state it so clearly in code, we would run the risk of eliminating possibly a great design that doesn't meet the letter of the code. So it is intended to be discretionary. The goal is to create this environment where people choose to walk.
Yeah, and again, I don't have any problem in the places where this is proposed here in nodal development, but I assume that we're going to try to, we're going to use this wording over and over again, and we keep using it without definitions for what you mean. So if you say, for example, prominent entries facing the street beyond what would be required, because we already require prominent entries facing the street. So, it's like, that's not anything unusual. So again, that's just one of my, concerns, that if we use terms and we don't, either we define them or we qualify them so it's clear that it's not, so that you don't end up designing a stock building and now all of a sudden you can make it 50 feet longer, continuous face than you could before, because, you have entries that face the street, which we require already, Bill?
I have a couple of questions. First one, in the housing and commercial zones, housing in C2, remind me or clarify for me, would this change then allow an entirely residential building in C2?
Yes,
Okay.
it would.
That was the way I was reading it. I just wanted to make sure I was understanding it right.
And actually, just to clarify, there's also, and this is one change, Steve, and I just remembered what it was, Commissioner Baker. This would also be applicable within 2 special area zones. There are some special area zones that lead you back to the C2 zone. They either rely on the C2 for the use standards or for the development standards. The Chamber Special Area Zone and the Fifth Avenue Zone both refer to the C2 use and permit requirements. So this would also apply there.
And the intent there then is, instead of just a vertical separation, you could have that
Correct.
vertical mix.
Correct.
You could
Yeah,
have
just
that
more
horizontal
flexibility.
mix.
Yep.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Second question then, in the surface parking limitation
Okay.
in the C3 zone, under 5, where you say no other vehicle access from any street right-of-way, i.e. no curb cut, is allowed. Are you wanting to say allowed or proposed?
Really allowed. I mean, our intent was allowed. So if you think, we were thinking about, what are the many things that, we don't like about surface parking lots? And one of them is what they do along that pedestrian edge. And so the idea would be to allow these kind of as a land banking strategy, which is how we've seen them, where the LCC building was. But if you think about where the U.S. Bank, if you think they actually, in a sense, meet this standard, they don't have a driveway that comes off the street. Their only access to that parking lot is via the 2 alleys, and then they have landscaping all the way around. So that actually would be the intent, that they would not be allowed to have a driveway off the street, with the exception of through the alley.
And then that's that additional 20 surface spaces so that you don't have a building on that particular
Right.
property also. Okay.
Any other questions? Steve?
Yeah, I just have a question. It's really more of a tracking issue. With the change to allow,
Which one are you looking at?
number 1, the housing.
Okay.
Which we're talking. So, one is is not as controversial for me, which is the change. Well, actually, I'll come back to the first question first. this applies to all C2 and C3.
Correct.
Do we have from our Envision Eugene studies the areas of commercial space that we need projected in the, what I'm concerned about is that we have a situation where we loosen up the requirements, and then, of course, we don't have space when somebody comes and looks for a commercial spot, because now, for whatever reason, because there wasn't a demand at the time, that's been converted to residential development. And now we don't have space for our commercial developments on key transit corridors, which is where we want them, rather than way out at the edge somewhere. So do we have, you have numbers on.
We do know how much commercial we need, and the types of commercial we need. And thinking ahead of that, we are, as part of the monitoring program, going to be monitoring how much of our commercial land is being used for commercial and how much of it is being used for multifamily. And I think as part of our regular check-ins on that, I don't know what the dates are, but that's something we'll be looking at. So I think we can, assess whether or not, if we're just seeing lots of multifamily and gobbling up our commercial land, we may want to, rethink what our standards are doing or why they're doing that. So we're proposing that be taken care of through the monitoring.
Okay, well, what I would suggest is you have that information about the areas
Okay.
with the packet, and it would be good to think it through beforehand, because it doesn't make sense to change the code and then 3 years down the line realize you have a problem and then try to change it back. It's too, so it would be better off to think it through and put in the change in such a way that it doesn't have the impact of allowing all of it to be commercial. Maybe, I'm just throwing that out, that just at least think it through. So, it's allowed for the next 3 years and then it sunsets or something. I don't even know. But the idea is that just that. And the thing about the parking one, I know there was pretty substantial opposition from the stakeholders at the time. Are there anticipated areas where you expect this to happen? The one that was thrown out was Doc Watson's.
Doc's
Pad next to the Kiva. When I think of downtown, or we were actually just discussing that, of what sites downtown, there's probably not that many that we would expect to see, but we also don't know. We don't know what people are planning. This one has been brought up for years.
Right. I'm just worried sometimes we pass things that aren't really needed. In other words, if that one site is not going to be able to support 40 parking places anyway, in other words, maybe all you need to do is add 10 more, and because if that's, in other words, there's no reason to make huge changes if they aren't needed. So if you know the particular site in question, you could actually determine, well, first of all, is it even possible with this change to even do that? Do you need, in terms of access, can you get by with one driveway off of an alley to service so many parking spaces? I don't know what the other code requirements are and so forth. So just that's because it's a limited area and the sites, it would maybe be worthwhile to identify potential sites when you bring this one up, so people would be aware of what the issue would be, and then they can see it in better context. Because right now it's sort of vague. Are we talking about the county knocking down its facility, or being sold and knocked down and converted to a huge surface parking lot between whatever it is, 6th and 7th,
I'm remembering that we did have those conversations, and when, for instance, we were talking about the Kiva parking lot.
They have somewhere between 22 or 24 spaces in that
small area.
In that small area. I was actually surprised at how many spaces they have there. So if you think about, I think the property that the Kiva on is the same, between the building and the parking is the same size as the former Doc's Pad. So we did talk about that they could get 40 probably pretty easily.
Except with this requirement, they have to have access only off the alley, and would that be allowed with other code requirements to have only a single entrance into the parking lot from the alley?
They have alleys coming both ways, so.
No,
yeah.
Actually,
just
the
one.
One way, just
the
one
one
way. Mm-hmm. The other alley's by the library.
Oh, they own the house. Okay.
That's it for those.
Bill? Along the lines of the TIA and the downtown parking exempt areas, I was just looking at the map and how that overlays with the web master plan.
Oh,
I was
thank
just
you for
curious- I was
actually
just
bringing that
curious
up.
How that's going to work, since
So-
it splits.
Right, so as part of the eWeb master plan, they're actually proposing to take eWeb out of this map. And so whatever map's in place at the time of adoption, that would be the map that would be adopted with the TIA.
So this upper area here for the
Right, so if,
downtown parking exempt, the downtown parking exempt would be removed from eWeb?
exact, so that's what eWeb, as part of their package, a giant binder that came before you, one of those things was to take them out of both the downtown automobile parking exempt area and I believe the TD overlay zone. So these maps would have to be updated. But at this point in time, since that hasn't been adopted by council, I'm just using the current maps. But I'm glad you brought that up.
Just saw it splitting it and thought we
Yeah.
probably should.
Yeah. Well, right. No, thank you.
Anything else?
Yeah, I have one more.
One more?
Yep. It's on the TIA also, and it's mainly not about downtown, because obviously but it's mainly about the Western University automobile parking exempt area, because essentially that's the hospital and the university.
It's not part.
Pardon?
Right. I mean, you're not, he knows that's not part of this, right?
What?
Yeah.
Right.
You want to say that?
That's not part of the,
That is not. So we're only talking about.
that's what I wanted to confirm,
Yes,
because on the
okay.
map it shows both dark and.
Right. So, and we actually went around and around on how to write the code, so it was really clear that it's just the downtown automobile parking exempt area, because I know it references this map, but
Okay, I just wanted to make it
No,
clear, because it was still a little confusing, because they both say exempt area.
right. No,
Underneath
so,
them.
okay, yes. This
remember
this
that.
amendment would only apply to the downtown one.
Okay.
Specified that. Yep. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah, Rick?
Just a comment, I've been involved in a number of the stakeholder meetings, and I think staff's adapted the code pretty well to what we've been hearing from stakeholders to this point, so I'm just looking forward now to our public hearing on this to sort of see what other issues may shake out of that, but at this point, I would expect not a lot of issues, I don't think. I could be wrong, I've been wrong on these before. I'll never forget the fence.
I do think you'll hear about, I think this one will be one of the more popular topics, and then maybe followed by the surface parking.
So just to quickly clarify, the surface parking changes could result in a property that has an existing building, having that building torn down and deconvert it to a surface parking lot.
That's correct.
Anything else? Well, Alyssa, Christine Ann, thanks very much. I guess we see you May 14th, huh? Do we know where that hearing will be?
That will be here.
Here, okay.
Yes.
Very good.
And it's the same night as the stormwater development standards.
Oh, okay.
We get
Rick?
2 for 1 that night.
And what would we do if we end up with an overflow crowd? Are we
I
ready to
think-
adapt to that?
Yeah, I think, I mean, we have 2 hearings, so if there's a lot of people for for the mixed use, or the downtown mixed use, we can have stormwater folks wait outside and vice versa, so.
Is this the room we're proposing?
It's the only room available.
Okay,
We tried to get the library, and it was not available that night.
okay.
It's just that we've done a couple of these before, and we end up with people out in the halls and
Yeah.
everything else that's not really conducive to a truly public hearing. I hate to see us run into that again.
I'm not expecting a huge crowd for either one of these topics. I think we'll be okay. But we'll put some measures in place, just to be
I
sure. What do you think?
Well, I think you're going to get a pretty good group of folks showing up for stormwater. And I would expect a reasonable group for this. Now, if this was the only one, I could see it maybe making it, but I'm not sure stormwater's not going to have a bigger group.
We'll work on some measures to address that.
Thanks.
Potentially, you could adjourn and flip the audience.
I'm thinking, right.
Maybe some will want to be here for both. Ed?
I'm going to guess you will have people here for both.
Okay.
Thank you
Thank you.
for coming.
I guess along that, could we set the room up so that we actually will be better facing the audience?
Yeah.
I mean, we did that at the library the last time, and it
I
worked
like that.
pretty well.
This side of the
However
table.
we do it, yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be great.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think anybody should have their back to the audience.
I won't be here, so that'll make it easier, one fewer persons.
Yeah, we'll only have 5 of you.
Well, I won't be here either.
You 2 will be gone, yeah.
Okay.
I like that suggestion, though.
What, that there only be 5 of us?
No.
That's the problem with using it.
What?
As you can tell, he's getting short time. He's just becoming a rabble
Getting
rouse.
predictable.
But we might need to.
We'll really know it when he shows up.
Are we ready?
Yeah. I have a text saying, "Here we come," and so I think
We're a little early.
momentarily we are running ahead of schedule for once.
Well, Rick has a filler item.
It's actually, I guess it would be down at the end, but I'll just ask since we have a moment. Could we get some input or some sort of presentation regarding scenario planning, the state mandate by House Bill 2001,
Sure.
so that we kind of understand where it is and where it's going? And
Yep.
it seems to be, in my mind, to be a fairly significant issue that the Planning Commission ought to be somewhat involved in, or at
Yep.
least have some input into how we're going to move forward, or what we're going to do or not do, or whatever else.
Yeah, that's a good idea. It's really just getting going right now, so I think the timing would be good in the next couple of months, maybe, to do
fits.
something. And in particular, kind of how does scenario planning work with Envision Eugene, and there are some coordination issues that might be of interest to you.
Yeah, and I think there's some potential funding available that we might actually be able to help our implementation strategy of Envision Eugene by getting some more money involved to maybe do a little more than maybe what's on the plate right now, or bigger and better.
We'll see, hopefully.
In regard to that, I attended the session, at least most of the session, with the gentleman from Utah who talked about scenario planning. It would be nice to have something a little more specific.
Oh, yes. Kent Howe is the project manager, former planning director for Lane County, and so we can, it will definitely be more tailored to what we're doing in this region.
But I do like the idea of having something to envision to look at what the impact. Good concept.
Well, I have another item I could talk about real briefly, and then if they're still not here, maybe we move on to the bin. I don't know.
Okay.
But you did get a new agenda and a new date for April 29th, a work session on both the capital improvement program and Lane Transit District. And so that's coming up next Monday. Both of those are really very kind of informational. There's certainly no action or anything. It's just kind of providing information to you. And so I'm thinking that we might not do AISs, but I wanted to make sure you would be okay with that.
Well, the only thing is, for the public, it's sort of like they need something like an announcement and a description. So I don't know, you're going to have to put something out.
A half a page things
Yeah.
kind of to
Yeah, you're going to
describe
have to
what
put something
we're talking
out,
about.
because otherwise people won't.
Well, we would definitely have an agenda,
Right.
but yeah, we could
Oh,
easily.
okay, you mean the packet behind the agenda?
Right, the summary that provides information ahead of time.
Well, the only thing I could think of, if the capital improvement program is stuff that directly relates to, streets and, infrastructure, I don't know, but there may be some interest in seeing that beforehand, so you can digest it.
Good idea.
You can put the link.
Put a link to the capital improvement program
Yeah.
that was just adopted.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll do something very, very brief for
Yeah.
each of them.
Or if there's a link even to whatever LTD might be talking about. If there's master plan or whatever.
Yeah, there you go. So just a heads up for you, you won't have a lot of reading to do before next Monday.
Oh, wow.
The CIP's like 140 pages long. What do you mean?
Well, okay, if you want to.
Randy Better, he's been asking for it for 2 years now.
I've already got it. I just didn't bring it with me today.
All right.
You're going to miss all this, you know that.
Stephanie and Terry, are you guys ready to go?
Ready if you're ready.
Well, we'll move on to agenda item 3 then, the equity and opportunity assessment.
So Terry and I are going to do a little bit of a tag team on this, and I'm going to kind of zip through the items that were sent to you in advance, and then also a presentation which was not included in your packet material, but reiterate some of the points that are in the 2-page description of the equity and opportunity assessment. And we've left some time for discussion. So at a kind of big picture level, Carolyn sent to each of you after the packet went out this description of the Lane Livability Consortium, and this was really just to provide some context in terms of what is the Lane Livability Consortium. I have come and talked to you at a previous date about the Lane Livability Consortium, and it was in a much earlier stage at that point. Things have definitely progressed since that point in time, and there's a number of different activities that are happening. Do you all have any questions about the Lane Livability Consortium as a whole, just based on the presentation that was sent to you in advance? Nope? Okay. So why don't I go ahead and just jump right into the equity and opportunity assessment.
Please do.
So each of you received a 2-page overview of the project, and the presentation that I'm going to do is just going to kind of go over some of those points and give you a little bit more context and background. And then Terry's going to talk about some of the potential applications to Envision Eugene and the work at the Planning Commission. Let's see here. That worked. Okay, great. So we're going to review the equity and opportunity assessment goals and process, view sample geographic data analyses that have been prepared thus far, talk about how it relates to Envision Eugene, and how this process will help the Commission further its work around equity and opportunity. The first question is, well, what do we mean by opportunity? The topics of equity, access, opportunity are all embedded in this project, and our working definition has been a condition or situation that places individuals in a position to be more likely to succeed or excel. And you can think of opportunity factors, and it's a little bit hard to read, but there are many positive opportunity factors such as access to housing, transportation, good schools, employment, food and services. I understand from Terry that these are all best outcomes that came out of the Envision Eugene process. And so there are certainly things that fit well in this analysis as well. On the negative side, isolation, segregation, exposure to concentrated poverty, exposure to environmental problems, exposure to crime. These are all things that we're trying to figure out how to avoid in our community. So what is the equity and opportunity assessment? It's essentially, it is a project of the Lane Livability Consortium. It's guided by 4 goals. Create a common understanding of issues of equity, access, and opportunity. We have many community agencies that are participating in the Lane Livability Consortium, and they all approach these questions a little bit differently. In fact, within the city of Eugene, there are many different divisions and departments, and they think about these things differently as well. And so the first piece of this has been, how can we begin a dialogue? Not that everybody has to agree or approach these things in the exact same way, but at least if we have a better common understanding of how different agencies and different parts of agencies are thinking about these issues, we can maybe move towards addressing them. The second goal is identify areas of greater or lesser opportunity within our community, primarily through data and analysis. This is really focused on how can we utilize data to help us create a complete picture of our community.
Data is not the only way, but it is just a tool. It is one of several tools that you can use. Yes, John?
So when you say areas, are you talking about spatial areas or subject areas or both?
Both. The third goal, consider how this analysis can inform plans, policies, investments, and public participation strategies. So the whole approach of this project has been very participatory from an agency perspective, really making sure that agencies are involved in every step of the process so that they can begin to think about how to use this data to inform the work that they're doing right now. And then lastly, develop recommendations for applying the analysis to those different areas as well. So this project certainly does not sit in isolation of many other things that are happening in our community. And in fact, we're building on a number of different activities that have already been underway, different analyses, different plans that look at issues of access, equity, and opportunity in different ways. And the hope is that it will inform the city's approach to triple bottom line analysis, scenario planning, which is happening on a regional scale, the planning processes of the MPO, other specific plans, and major public investments. The process steps that we have been going through is to identify key issues and data. And so back in December, the core area team, which includes myself as well as 2 staff people from the community planning workshop and also staff from the city of Springfield, as well as Jason Dedrick from the city of Eugene. We did interviews with 13 agencies and 60 people from those different agencies in those interviews to understand what are some of the key issues that different people bring to this discussion. Then we started looking at different maps and data sets, and we identified over 30 data sets that we can map on a regional level that seemed appropriate for this analysis. The third step is that we discussed and interpreted the data and maps. We held 2 map review sessions with over 50 participants from this interagency group to talk about the maps and figure out what scale, what issues we should be looking at, what are the most appropriate data points for us to consider as a group. The next step is holding discussions with various community groups and boards and commissions, such as yourself, and then also holding 4 focus area meetings that will focus on specific topics and developing those recommendations. And then with all of that, we'll develop a final report. All of this will be completed by the end of June.
June of 2013?
Yes.
How about that?
That's why I asked. I'm not used to things moving that quick.
So as I discussed, the data analysis, the first step was identify key data sets, and then as everyone has been looking at these different data sets, immediately people have said, well, how can we layer this information? In order to layer the information, we've been talking about creating some kind of neighborhood opportunity typology, which would have appropriate categories and scales for different indicators that would allow you to try to look at that data as a collection rather than each map independently. And then third from that, we will identify any areas of vulnerability or concern. And we're still working on the definition of exactly what that would be. But in essence, it's places where there are multiple factors indicating low opportunity and high exposure to negative conditions. Yes, John?
When you say neighborhood, is that correlated with neighborhood associations in Eugene? Is it a larger scale, smaller scale?
So the unit for analysis, there's 2 units for analysis that we're using for this. One are census tract boundaries, which have between 1,500 and 8,000 people in them, and then census tract block groups. and those are smaller.
So smaller, okay.
Block groups are smaller than census tracts. And part of that is because this analysis is for the entire metropolitan plan organization area. So Eugene has neighborhood boundaries, Springfield does not. Unincorporated areas outside of Eugene and Springfield also do not have neighborhood boundaries. And also most of the data that's available to us, it's already available to us in block group and census tract boundaries, and it would be a significant amount of work to try to resort that by neighborhood.
Well, I think it's good that you're looking at a smaller, finer sieve anyway.
Yes.
Mine actually deals with your third block, and maybe you're not there yet, but it would seem that a lot of those terms are fairly qualitative in nature, and what one set of people or one set of our community may believe are necessarily negative conditions may not be viewed that same way by others. I mean, how do you figure out what that is? Because that seems high exposure to negative conditions. That seems like you could run the entire gamut. I mean, I may think a negative condition is something completely different than someone else.
Well, and that's part of the reason why we're working with all of the agencies to look at the data. And because you're right, it is a matter of perception. I think that, for example, if we have an area with high poverty, high crime, low access to transit, low access to higher performing schools, that's the kind of piece that would show up here. You're looking for a combination of factors which lead to lesser opportunities for the people who live there. Absolutely, I think we should have a healthy discussion about what do those things really mean for folks. But all of this is really meant as fodder for discussion and helping us to think about the geographic variations that do exist in our community, and then how does that relate to plans, investments, policies, public participation strategies.
Well, the reason is that when I first looked through sort of the list of agencies and everything, they seem to me to be generally grouped, and it seemed to me there was a large sector of the community that was just completely omitted from that process. I mean, I've worked with agencies that there's a lot of real common threads that run through what agencies deal with and how they deal with things and what their situations are that is completely removed from other community sectors that we have. And it seems to me if you only kind of hear from one sector, then what you deal with tends to be a little bit skewed. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but it just says that you may be missing, at least it seems to me, and I don't know enough about this, I've been trying to read more about it, but it seems to me you tend to miss a big sector of our community and how they may react to what is livability or negative impacts and what could be done and how they read things that may affect the economy or our workforce or other things.
Yeah. Well, certainly as part of your comments, if there are other community agencies or groups that you think we should be talking to in this process, I would love to hear that. And so it is,
I mean, have you gone to the business community?
We have not gone to the business community. We are having, one of the focus area sessions is going to be on economic development issues, and so we're working with economic development staff to identify participants from the business community for that particular session.
And how about the environmental community?
The environmental community, so there are a couple of different places. I'm going to be doing a presentation to the Sustainability Commission and the Human Rights Commission. They're going to do a joint meeting in May. So that's one way that we're getting to the environmental community. But there may be other ways that you would suggest.
Well, some of the agencies also deal directly with environmental justice issues like Beyond Toxics, and I'm blanking on the other one that we've done work with, and that leads, it's a good segue for me when I start to talk about how this touches Envision Eugene. So I'll just put a little bookmark there, because we can talk about that in a little bit more detail in a minute.
Are you finished, Stephanie, or?
No, not quite.
Okay, well, let,
If they're specific to this page, okay.
You have a question about this page?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's very short, and I think I already know the answer. I assume you looked at air quality and ground pollution issues.
So part of the data sets that we're continuing to gather information on readily available data sets. So for ground pollutants, there are some statewide databases, and we're currently assessing the feasibility of mapping those. For air pollution, that's it's difficult to map. You can map points of emitters, but that doesn't really give you an understanding of the level of particulates and how they vary in different parts of the community. So that's another area where we're trying to figure that out. Some of these factors are much easier to map than others.
Seems like El Centro and Beyond Toxics have done some work around air quality issues in the train song Bethel area.
They have, and that is specific to that part of the community.
But you don't have a...
Correct. We don't have it for the entire geographic area that we're looking at for this particular project. I think the other piece of this too, and I forwarded to the first map, but is recognizing that, assuming that this exercise has value, what we're starting with, it could be considered a base set of maps that can certainly be built upon. So even with just identifying 30 maps of readily available data for the entire area, that's a pretty significant chunk of work to get those prepared and be able to layer them in such a way. Our hope is that by having a broadly available set of base layers, that different agencies can focus on developing those harder to measure factors, which we currently don't have the right sort of mechanisms in place to collect that information.
Part of your report would say what we don't have as well as what you do? Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So we wanted to show you some examples. And so this is the poverty map. And this is based on American Community Survey data, which is a sample. And so as you can see on this map, the darker sort of reddish brown areas are the areas of highest concentration of poverty in our community. And it is based on the percentage of the people living in that census tract who are in poverty. There's the area that is the areas that are the highest here around the university, here, which includes Glenwood and a rural portion of the community. And then this area here, which is actually has a fairly high concentration of seniors, which may be contributing to the concentration there. And then this area here. The medium areas are the kind of lighter shade, and then the lowest areas are the gray-blue areas in the surrounding parts of the community.
What do you mean by lowest?
Lowest percentage of poverty. So for this particular scale, the lowest is about 15.8% and below. The medium is 15.7 to 39% or 40%, and then the highest is 40 and above. Yes.
Did you, when you looked at this, did you also look at the type of housing, the percent of different types of housing within those areas? I'm thinking of that area there off of Coburg Road. That's hard for me to believe that that's a poverty area, but it's an area of a high concentration of apartment buildings, and there's a high concentration of over 55 seniors in there, and it may just be based on the fact that you have a different type of living arrangement that kind of skews that a little bit.
Well, and this is where the data layering comes into play. So one of the other factors we're looking at is age, which is something you just mentioned. Another factor is housing type. So there's, this is where you have to say, so immediately if we're looking at a poverty map, folks begin thinking about, well, what are the other factors that are interacting to produce this particular trend? And so that's why we are attempting to try to figure out how to layer the data in such a way that can
Because I
make
believe-
those things apparent.
Because I believe the way the census information establishes income level is true income. How much am I getting, not am I living on my retirement funds, am I not working? I could have
Yep.
millions of dollars, but I don't have any income.
Yep. Yep. So the second map, and I apologize that this is a little bit smaller, this is Latino and minority population. And so it's the combination of people who self-identify in census as Latino, and then also people who self-identify as one or more non-white races in the census. And as you can see, this is at a finer scale. This is block group level information because Latino and minority are captured on the census. It is more detailed information. It's not a sample, so we have better information for race and ethnicity here. The third map, and I apologize that the colors are not showing up that well, is percent of renter households with a housing cost burden. And so the darkest areas are the places where 75 to 100% of the renters in those block groups have a housing cost burden, meaning they're paying more than 30% of their income for rent plus utilities. This is a map which was actually produced by LCOG, and this is a map that is going to be part of the scenario planning effort. So they were able to calculate jobs accessible by transit within 30 minutes. And so the areas that are the red areas have the highest access to the higher number of jobs within the community by transit. And then the blue areas are the places where they have the access to the least number of jobs by transit within the community. And then this map is body mass index information, and so this is based on information provided from driver's licenses on weight and height. And so you can't see it very well here, but the green areas are lower body mass, and then the kind of orange areas are higher body mass. So those are some examples. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Terry to talk a little bit about how this relates to Envision Eugene.
We are licensed. Take your weight, figure out if you're overweight or not.
Well, assuming that people don't lie about their weight on their driver's licenses or make themselves taller than they really are. So the data is only as good as the source. Do you have a comment, John?
Just a quick comment, Stephanie. It's hard to tell from those maps, but I'm wondering if you're keeping a common color pattern between the different maps. If not, you might want to try to do so. For example, areas of no data. If they were all white, then you don't get confusion about. Sorry, it's my previous career that popped out.
Absolutely. Yeah, part of the map, the purpose of the map review sessions were to get just those kinds of comments about readability and, and recognize this is a sample set of maps. This is not the final by any mean. And so some of those are actually quite early versions of the maps.
Thank you.
Another note about those is that, as Stephanie said, they're still being revised, and when they are done, planning staff from Eugene is certainly interested in taking a closer look and looking at all of them. What are there, 30 maps or something like that? There are quite a few, and they're really fascinating to look at, and so we would let you know when they are done and when we'll be looking at them in case you want to drop by and have a look yourselves. Okay, so how does this all relate to Envision Eugene? Well, we have a number of implementation projects underway, as you know. And on the next slide, I've listed a couple of them that I think are particularly going to benefit from looking at these maps and using this data. So first among those is our expansion analysis. You might recall that we have a fairly prescriptive process we have to go through when analyzing expansion areas according to statute. But that doesn't mean that we can't look at other data and use that to inform our thinking about where we expand and how that will affect our population. So if you look at our community vision map, you can see our proposed industrial expansion area out by the airport, and this crosses over into another implementation project, which is environmental justice analysis. The council asked us to specifically look at issues around environmental justice between industrial and residential land uses. And since we were at the time proposing to expand for residential on Clear Lake Road as well, that was an area of particular interest for groups like Beyond Toxics. The Human Rights Commission brought it up. I think the Sustainability Commission asked us to look at it, and there was a pretty healthy discussion at council as well. So the actual analysis has just begun, and it will benefit greatly from looking at these maps. And also, John, your note about talking with El Rapa and El Centro and different agencies that have collected some of this information, that can be used to just kind of paint as complete a picture as we can in looking at these. But I, for one, am really excited to have this at my fingertips because different agencies have different data. It's amazing the complexity and the amount of information that's out there. And to be able to fold it right into our implementation work is really cool. So thank you. Two other examples I threw up there are the West Eugene MX planning, going down West 11th and actually from downtown 6th and 7th Avenues and down Garfield. These are areas where there are existing industrial uses. There's a brownfield studies going on concurrently. There's just a lot going on in that western part of the city. So some of those maps that Stephanie showed you, we've started to look at. What are the different demographic characteristics of the population that are currently living along the transit corridor, and how can that inform our station area planning and even our zoning of those areas. And then lastly, area planning. So we know that we're in the middle of area planning on South Willamette. I'll just mention one little note because when I looked at one of the maps, South Willamette jumped out, and it was the map about bicycle commuting. So percentage of trips by bicycle, and South Willamette and the neighborhood just west of there actually showed up on the map as an area with really high bicycle commuting already, which was interesting.
Eric, could you say a little more about the environmental justice analysis?
Sure. Do you want to know about the process or the status?
Aware of it. Tell me what it is.
Okay. When we presented the recommendation to the City Council last June, there was specific conversation around the industrial expansion area and agencies that asked councilors to direct us to study this issue specifically. And so it was part of the motion that council directed us to look at. And it's part of the technical components document that really lays out our work plan as we start to prepare the adoption package for the UGB. It's not really defined other than take a look at environmental justice issues, report back to us, basically. And like I said, I think it's really lucky that we're going to have this data to inform that, because we would be trying to generate a lot of the same information through the analysis that we were asked to do, and as luck would have it, we're getting a lot of that already being done.
At some point, there'll be a response back to council about what you found.
Absolutely, and I'm the lead on that task. At this point, it's sort of, I'm thinking about how to scope out the various pieces of it, who are the stakeholders to talk to, and I welcome a conversation if you have some ideas about that. Also, we'll be doing area planning in other parts of the community. So although this data and this project will end, we will have a kind of snapshot in time and be able to use that going forward to inform River Road Santa Clara area planning, university area planning, and any other areas that we want to prioritize for future area planning. And the last thing I'll say on that note is that I think another really useful way we can use this data is for the planning staff and the commission to take a look at areas of greatest need in our community or lowest opportunity areas to prioritize our future planning work. So if we learn through this process that there are areas that really do need some specific attention, this can help tell that story and help us prioritize our work. That's it.
I have two questions. The first one's for Stephanie. This is equity and opportunity assessment. Is this the main driver of the livability consortium, or are there other topics, as I see here, economic prosperity and connection with public health? Are there other major presentations like this that pertain to something other than equity and opportunity?
Yes. There are many different projects under the umbrella of the Lane Livability Consortium, and so I would say there are probably about 24 major projects under the umbrella of the Lane Livability Consortium. So some of them are being implemented in different ways. So, for example, brownfields. Brownfields is something that was supported through the Lane Livability Consortium. It resulted in an application for brownfields assessment funding, and that work is underway. Scenario planning is something that's happening on a regional basis. It's partially supported through the Lane Livability Consortium.
Okay.
Yes.
And so then the second question really goes to Terry and Robin and Carolyn, and has to do with area planning and trying to connect some dots here. Just a wealth of base information that's being provided by this particular effort. The Planning Commission today recommended that staff pursue some other questions that we have regarding the South Willamette project. Scenario planning, as I understand it, has in large part to do with greenhouse gas emission reduction, but involves transportation planning and kind of wants you to look at what if you don't do anything, and what if you do plan A, and what if you do plan B? How does that work? Is there some way to tie all this together? We want to keep momentum going on South Willamette. We've raised other questions, other issues that I don't know how much resource the planning department has, if there's funding available through this or scenario planning. If South Willamette was used as kind of a prototype example, area planning example in this, that then we could transfer to other transit corridor development, other area developments, can you consider tying this all together and keeping the momentum going on South Willamette, using that, since there's so much being generated there specifically already in terms of how we want to increase density, how the traffic flow is going to go on South Willamette. And I think back to Chris's comment that on one hand, the South Willamette street design is looking at traffic as of 2018, and we talked about what about future traffic? What if we go to the densities that we're trying to go to incorporate the additional 200 units above and beyond what's there already, so that we don't have to expand the urban growth boundary, and maybe even take it a notch up beyond that and say, what if we incorporate 500 extra units? It's kind of that scenario what if thing. What happens to the street? Is that all a possibility to do within this, do you think?
Within the Lane Livability Consortium?
And scenario planning in South Willamette?
I think we're going to be well ahead of scenario planning, actually. Scenario planning work will extend through next year, is that correct? South Willamette, we will plan on acting on your recommendations and getting that before the City Council in June.
Oh, okay.
And having as much done as we can by the end of the year to incorporate into the Envision Eugene adoption. So I would say we are we are already putting South Willamette on the fast track.
Okay.
But you do bring up all of these converging kind of planning undertakings, and how do they all fit together, which is a great conversation which we can pick up with scenario planning.
Yeah, and I'm with Rick. I think at some point in time, that scenario planning thing ought to be a topic here. I've got Rick and then Steve and then John.
If I could just quickly respond to your question. So the goal of what we're trying to capture in the final report are recommendations. And so we're working with all the different agencies to develop those recommendations. And so Terry has identified area planning as one potential application for the data. So we would include that in the report as a recommendation. Now, what the agencies decide to do after that is really up to the agencies in terms of how they decide to apply the information. And this, what comes out of the equity and opportunity assessment is going to inform scenario planning. So there is definitely a linkage there. But as Carolyn said, at the same time, there are lots of other things that are underway that aren't necessarily going to stop until the scenario planning process is done. But as you know, all of those things are very long-term in their implementation, and so I still think that, as South Willamette Plan gets implemented over the next 10, 15, 20 years, there will be multiple opportunities
Okay,
to
in
use
terms
that
of
information.
actual build-up, but like scenario planning, what I'm hearing is scenario planning has a kind of a definite time certain when it's supposed to be completed. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Like December of this year?
Next year, I believe.
Next year,
Year, okay.
2014.
Okay. Rick?
Yeah, it just seemed to me when I started to read through this and look at a lot of the other elements that we're doing, Envision Eugene, our transplant, some of the work that's happening in Springfield, some of the work happening in Lane County. I have a level of uncomfortableness or discomfort because I don't know how this all kind of is starting to meld together. In the past, since I've been watching these things go on for a couple of decades, I would watch things occur almost at loggerhead, which I'm sure we've got over, but there's so much work going on, it would be nice to sort of get a better feel, and I don't need you to do that, but if you could direct me to sort of see how all these pieces are going to slowly come together, because as I started going through some of this information, I could see other pieces that I've heard about or studied that, well, where do they link in here? I'm happy to see that we're linking our plans and our studies, because I think for so long we just had all of these disconnected plans and studies that we finished. They were really great, and we've got bookshelves full of plans and studies that we never got anywhere. So I'm getting a comfort level that these are coming together, but I'd like to know more about how they're all working in. As Terry says, she's getting a lot of information out of somebody else's, which I'm happy to hear, because we don't need to keep rebuilding that same wheel over and over because we're a different agency or a different department or different city or whatever else. But it'd be nice to try to figure out if there's somewhere where I could even study more to kind of get all of this stuff, how it's all starting to come together. Is there such a place?
Well,
Other than between somebody's ears that knows it all's going to happen that way?
there is a lot going on. I think I have a couple different ideas. One of them is I think part of what Lane Livability Consortium is doing is it's helping influence how we do our work. And so really taking a regional approach and making sure that we have good relationships and good mechanisms in for sharing information across the region. Also doing that cross topics. So, but looking at, economic prosperity, looking at social equity, looking at housing, looking at transportation, making sure that we're cutting and synthesizing our work that way as well. So a lot of it for me is about how we gather information and access that information and do our work. And an idea that we're following up on right now that I like to think will help to synthesize all this is we're actually, and I'll come talk to you more about this later, but we are looking at how the Metro Plan will be used in the future. One of the final tasks of the Lane Livability Consortium is kind of wrapping this together and looking at our regional planning tools. And the timing is quite good for us to look at how we use the Metro Plan because, as you know, with Eugene having its own urban growth boundary and Springfield having its own urban growth boundary, we each have to have our own comprehensive plan. And in the past, the Metro Plan served the function as our entire region's comprehensive plan. And so, given that we're going to each have our own comprehensive plans, what's the role of the Metro Plan? Does it still have a land use function? Is it more of a regional framework that is more aspirational in nature? We have a cross-jurisdictional team right now that is, we just had our first meeting last week that is starting to explore that. So that's another big plan to kind of add to the top of the list of things that you already identified as these efforts that are moving forward, and how do we synergize, or how do we kind of weave them all together. I think that Metro Plan may help us determine that in the future. So I'm happy to, when I have a little bit more information, come back and talk to you how that is all unfolding too.
Guys, at 12:55, we really need to probably get into the bin discussion. So with that, Steve, John, and Bill, if you would keep that in mind with your questions and either respond succinctly or talk real fast.
Okay, I'll be relatively short. I'm hoping that the work that on the equity and opportunity assessment will feed into the next phase of the South Willamette planning effort, and it would have been nice to have had it in advance. And I also wish we had it before we wrote our recommendations, because I'd add another recommendation to the ones we're forwarding on about council direct staff to include information from your work in the next phase, because I think that's an important issue, that we should carry on. But obviously the value of this is that will be sort of some backdrop that we can use in other areas when we look at area planning, scenario planning, whatever. Because there's obviously a lot of information in there that was not captured as part of the South Willamette planning at all. And it'd be useful to have that and see what that might have done in terms of what you might, have done differently. So that's my concern.
John?
Just a quick comment and then a question. It's very encouraging to me to see how much more data we're involving in our analysis as we move forward. Phrase from my past life, data-free analysis is a lot of what we've done in the past. We're not there anymore. We're actually getting this data together, which leads me to the question. It's great to have this snapshot in 2013. Is there policy or plan in future to make sure these data sets get updated into the future?
So one of the final tasks of the Lane Livability Consortium is for the different agencies and partners to think about the future. And, and so I think of almost everything we're doing under the Lane Livability Consortium as a test, and to see, what is the value, does it make sense to continue doing this in some way, shape, or form? And so that's certainly a question that I will put in front of the groups that are involved, and see where that leads. Thus far, I think a lot of people are finding value in doing this. I think the key question with any of these kinds of efforts is the money, absolutely, and how do you sustain that? And can you make an argument that it's cost efficient to do something like this for multiple agencies? So we will be exploring that question.
Thank you.
Bill?
I'm glad to see the regional aspect of this, and that our own individual plans won't be completely in a vacuum, and that it'll be interrelated. I guess one of the benefits I think I see with this, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, would be the idea that as we move into kind of, I'll say, fleshing out all of Envision Eugene and where that goes and how that is implemented, that this data then, with some overlays and all of those layers that we're looking at, could point up areas maybe that we need to adjust, say, for instance, concentrated areas of poverty and crime, and maybe some planning issues that relate to those that we could perhaps correct or change to maybe deconcentrate poverty so that, I'm making the assumption that concentrated poverty necessarily might increase crime, and that decentralizing that and spreading those lower income areas out might be a better planning scenario than in concentrated areas, as an example. And so I guess, is that kind of where maybe, Terry, you're seeing?
I'm nodding because I'm
this?
thinking about my conversation with Stephanie when we were talking about the city's housing dispersal policy. Another really good example of a project where we can use this data to assess how that policy is working and whether we want to continue it or alter it. Yeah.
Stephanie, Terry, thanks very much.
Thank you for
Don't
your
stay
time.
away so long next time, Stephanie. Talk to us again real soon.
Anytime.
Okay, staff and commission, ready to plow some new ground on this bin idea. You all received 10 bin proposals from commission members. You want to share them with
Yeah, thanks.
And what our purpose is today is, as we originally lined it out, is to determine which of those 10 bin proposals we simply want to go ahead and have for consideration in the future. Do they stay on the table, or do we take them off the table? That's our objective today. Looking forward a little bit, on May 6th, the idea would be then to prioritize whatever makes it through today's cut, prioritize those remaining items. And then, just as I'm looking forward to our June 24th meeting, I'm thinking, okay, then what do we do with those that are prioritized and move forward? So what I propose we do today is go ahead and, as we had outlined, take our votes on each of these 10 items, see which move forward. But then I think at some point in time, perhaps May 6th, or even if we work in some time next week, have some discussion about what we're going to do with these, what the expectations and the outcomes are, okay? I don't know that we've necessarily defined. Fair enough? So we can just work through these. Bill had the first one, was dwelling unit definition and density of multifamily.
Can I make a
zone.
suggestion?
Yeah, John. Yeah.
Before we decide
Sure.
what it is we're moving forward, I think we need to know what moving forward means. So if we could take a little bit about what happens with these items on the bin, what's the intent, I think it would inform our decisions about what's important.
You want to say
Can
something?
Can I wax poetic one more time?
Please. Yeah.
My thought when originally proposing this is, to some degree, it's not necessarily an action list for anything to go forward right now, but just those topics that we think might need exposition at some point in time. So I can envision something being on the bin for 3 or 4 or 5 years before it ever gets to the point of import. It's just that as commissioners change, as minds fade, those issues might still be important, but there's no way for us to say, oh yeah, I remember that's something we wanted to talk about. So in my mind, and that's just me, I don't see this as necessarily everything has to be vetted right away. It's just sort of an institutional memory.
The question I have then is this. If, for example, we should pass all 10 of these forward today, and May 6th we prioritize them, what do we do on the 24th? We have 10 prioritized items. What's the purpose of 24th June meeting?
My idea would be those that are ripe and important. There might be 1 or 2 of those that we might be ready to present for discussion. Now, your real question is what happens after discussion.
Yeah.
To some degree, that depends on staff. If they see it as something that is also ripe and something that's doable, then we would prioritize it into the work schedule. But if it doesn't make it into that first year work schedule, I don't think it necessarily drops off the bin.
Yeah, I sort of agree, because I think we need input from staff to understand, because if one of the issues is something that could be handled very quickly and easily and took a minimal amount of staff time, that may raise its priority over something that may require a significant amount of staff time and a lot of code rewrite or whatever it else might be, even though on the surface it may be more important than my first example. It may be that the first example gets itself done in a matter of weeks or months or however long, where the second one may take a lot more staff input at a time when we don't have staff availability because of all the Envision Eugene process. So I think, to me, the idea of priority weighs not only importance, but time, staff time, and then the time necessary to get that project through to completion.
If we come through with the Planning Commission prioritization, then what I'm hearing you say is let the staff react to it and see what their sense of that prioritization might be in terms of applicability and realistic.
Yeah, I think that would be, now that you mention it that way, I think I could agree with that, because I don't want staff to take the time now to try to fill in on every one of these 10 issues, how much time and energy and everything else, because as soon as they start spending time doing that, then we're not getting our other stuff done.
Well,
And we
I
may
think
find-
Carolyn's told us that they don't have a whole lot of time unless it already fits into a
Right.
work task.
Right.
Steve?
Well, I just would, I agree, I think we should leave things, we shouldn't throw them out, with the exception of what the vetting process that we might be doing today would be, or some other time as well, is there might be a couple of proposals that are duplicates of each other, and we decide to take one out of the bin and just move the other one and leave the other one. In other words, if there's some projects that are so similar that they're duplicates, there's no reason having a separate item for it. So I think that's another purpose of sort of the, well, in the tech business, we call it triage. We kind of
Yeah.
screen things out.
Yeah. So, Carolyn?
Oh,
and
no, you
Becky?
can go first.
John?
There may be something there that's one person's pet peeve that no one else sees any value, and we might throw one out for that reason, but I'd be careful even with that.
Okay, Carolyn?
Just back to the timing and the work plan challenges, I appreciate everything I've heard, and I also remember the conversation in the same way, and that when I looked through the bin proposals, I would think all of them are related to Envision Eugene implementation. However, that doesn't mean they're necessary for the adoption package, and as you recall, that is where we are kind of focusing this work, and our current work plan is on things that are absolutely needed for adoption. And so that sounds in line with what other people are thinking as well. And then as far, I also think it may be that some of these items don't get carried forward as a work plan item, but that doesn't mean they don't deserve discussion around the table to kind of vet and better understand what is intended. And so for that reason, I'll just say, I'm comfortable with any of them being discussion items.
Bill?
Well, I guess I just want to jump in and say that I think my thought is these are items that we want to, as John said earlier, at least keep on the list as time goes by, that they don't get forgotten, and that I'm very sensitive to staff time right now with Envision Eugene and the implementation of that, and not, as Rick said, not sidelining that. I don't think any of us have that intent at all. And so I think it's really just things that we've either seen or experienced or feel could improve, and we want to at least get that in the queue so that at some point, whenever that might be, whether it's even part of this initial part of Envision Eugene or 3 to 5 years down the road, they aren't forgotten and they're at least looked at. At least that's my thought.
And based on what I heard here, let me try this. Rather than going through these one at a time and making a case for it, what if we flipped it? Are there any that any commission member doesn't think is deserving of moving forward. Maybe it'd be easier that way if we took it by exception.
Does that mean I get to pick on everybody else's?
Yeah. You know, and I would offer one, and I did tell John Jaworski that since he wasn't here today, if any of his recommendations didn't make it forward, that I'd give him a chance to appeal at the May 6th meeting. But one that I question, and Carolyn, I need your input on this, is the needed housing. I know when Emily gave us the primer on needed housing, and then when we went through wasn't it the Deerbrook appeal, it seemed like needed housing is pretty well fixed, and I'm just wondering, is it in the city's interest to revisit the whole needed housing issue?
I would say that there are legal implications, and there is state law, which we have to continue to be consistent with. And so the way that it is phrased here, you know, again, we could have a conversation about it, but it would be a huge work item. It would, and there are certainly, we would want to have attorneys involved and things like that. It's a big one.
Steve, you had a comment?
Yeah, this is I don't particularly like the wording of I think what John is proposing doesn't really make sense, but what makes sense is what Portland and other jurisdictions did, is you put in teeth in the code requirements even for needed housing. It was an omission on our part when we lost, I was told, because I wasn't paying attention at the time, that we lost at Luba, and were forced at a very quick point in time to incorporate needed housing in our code, and we did it let's just say we did it in a poor way because it lacks certain checks and balances that the other path does. So there are some requirements that disappear out that shouldn't disappear out just because you apply under the needed housing statute. So you shouldn't be able to exclude needed housing when it's required, but there should be code requirements whether they're there or not, because other jurisdictions handle this very well, and they do not have the problem that we have. In other words, the only time that people use needed housing is when it's needed housing, and that's because there's no code advantage for circumventing various requirements.
So this brings up a process question for me, which is that if we do move these things forward, assumedly they have a champion on the Planning Commission who's willing to develop them, maybe the first step is to sit down with staff, and this does mean sitting down with staff and sort of vetting what the commissioner or commissioners think is the route to take, and hearing from staff about, well, have you thought about this? This is what I think your task looks like. Do you still want to continue? Just a short 20 to 30 minute, although times 10, that's now 200 to 300 minute discussion about what does this really look like from staff's perspective before we start diving in, heading in a direction that may not be fruitful or creates more work than is necessary.
Well, and see,
There's another problem.
given that, I can see why we may only be able to discuss 2 or 3 of these on the 24th, and why internal prioritization would be important.
Agreed.
Bill?
But I think part of that ought to be, before you really start going forth and doing great things, making sure the things that you're doing really are great.
Yeah, but when you say times 10.
No, I agree. Whatever they are, there
Yeah.
should be an initial step to make sure that whoever's doing this is online with what staff sees.
The way, John, that you presented it, that we've carried forward, is from this meeting, we may or may not whittle down any 10 of these. Next meeting, we prioritize them, and then we take maybe the top 2 or 3, and that's what's brought to the June 24th meeting, and that's an hour and a half's time of staff. Okay, Bill?
Well, I guess I just had a question, actually, of Steve. In yours, you said you had 2 attached, which ended up as G and H, but then Randy also had I, which was the entire multi-dwelling
Yeah.
code in Portland. Did you actually intend to have, or were you just proposing 2 as kind of reference to the Portland Code. I just wanted to make sure I understood.
I was using those two as examples out of the Portland Code.
Okay.
What's really nice about, I'm glad that Randy included that. What's nice about the Portland Code is 30 pages, and that's the whole code for multifamily.
Okay.
I mean, some modest amount of pages.
Bill's question
So
is,
my question is, so you do have actually three then,
Well, I'm glad that,
essentially?
yeah,
Yeah.
although I think that one is a bigger issue.
Sure.
I didn't expect that we would be dealing with that one right away, but that's,
Sure.
that was
I
an
just wanted to make
example.
sure if that was a
Yeah.
separate one, or if that was just
Right, and-
kind of an overview of the two that you submitted.
Right.
Okay.
And just in responding, I think the discussion we just had about needing housing is why we want to discuss these first before we discuss them in detail, because we can, and the same thing with that, I don't think we should really plan on moving that one forward immediately, even though it would be ideal, because we keep seeming to extend the code rather than, we talk about shrinking it, and then we have this new downtown plan, and now we have this new E-Web plan. It's getting worse and worse rather than better and better. But the example is a needed housing where we could modify a proposal, maybe better understand how it should be looked at if we're going to look at it. Not trying
we
to...
can't do that till John's here. I mean, his
Right.
proposal is his proposal.
Right.
So you all, if I would make the motion to delete the needed housing issue, how would that fare? Would that pass?
I was just postponing it because we might reorient the proposal on needed housing to deal with a true, a weakness, but not the weakness. We're not going to try to fight the legal standards.
Are there any of the 10 items that anybody would suggest we not carry forward in the first cut?
With the understanding that it may just sit on a queue for a while before they make it to the top.
Well, again, I don't think we're likely to be able to ask staff to rewrite the multifamily code as a separate 30-page chapter anytime soon, given their other requirements, although I think that would be a valuable thing to do. So I don't think we're going to move that forward right away.
But if there are issues that we see with the entire multifamily code, that might be something good to have parked on that list
Right.
to address at some point.
Could be number 10 on the priority list.
Right.
Okay. What about are there any cuts, or if somebody want to make a motion to move all 4 of the alternatives forward for prioritization?
Hearing no objections, I would move to move them all forward.
Well, second to that?
Well, again, didn't we want to prioritize so we could discuss?
Well, not this time.
Next
Not this
step.
time, okay.
This is just whether any of
He was
these...
trying to cut our workload down.
Yeah. Are any of these not worthy on a majority basis of who's here to move forward? Bill?
Well, and I guess I've kind of heard that perhaps my bike parking ratio proposal might already be being addressed.
That is my understanding, that there's an effort underway out of Public Works Transportation where they are looking at that. What I would want to do, I guess, is maybe send your proposal to Reed, who's working on that, to make sure that that is indeed being covered.
Oh,
I think the two issues that I had were the ratios and then also the parking in the public right-of-way ability to...
Just to simplify things, I'd say keep it in.
Okay.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Yeah, I would say, given how slow we've been moving on bicycles, I think it's important to keep it in. Because even though it's kind of on the radar, if it on the radar means without some incentive, it doesn't happen for 3 or 4 more years, that may not be the pace you want to see.
And
I
if
think
we're
there are
lucky, it'll happen fast and we can cross something off our list.
That's what I was thinking.
We can have an early success?
Yeah.
There needs to be some sort of periodic assessment, either to add or remove things. At that point, you can say, well, that one's done. Give ourselves a gold star.
Well, and I
Staff.
guess I would just want to suggest in a big picture aspect, if these are things that are going to be on for perhaps 3 to 5 years, that whoever proposes that maybe should have the responsibility to kind of write a narrative related to that, so that that can go with the parking, so that 10 years from now, when it comes back up, it's like, what were they thinking? That there's at least some narrative to explain that. And I think that should fall on whoever proposes it.
Oh, I wonder if it'd be helpful if we could ask Carolyn to go through our list and not spend a lot of time, but if you could maybe, as we get to these, if you could think about them enough to say, gee, I see this to be monumental. I see this to be, a year project for the entire staff, or no, based on what we're talking about here, I think this could be a little bit simpler or easier, or, I look at one of the things Bill asked, and he just wanted to talk about a different way for us to note multifamily units, That, to me, would seemingly on the surface be fairly straightforward if you just took units and turned them into bedrooms.
Well, here's
As
what
an
I would
example.
suggest. Is if this group is ready to move all 10 of these forward, it's going to take homework, but we need to be prepared to come to the May 6th meeting with our own prioritizations. And the way I suggest we do that is rank these from 10 most important down to 1 least important. Come with those numbers, write them on the board, we average them up, and the one that gets closest to 10 gets top priority, and the one that's closest to 1 gets bottom priority. And then, Carolyn, your homework between now and then would be to be prepared to respond to how that prioritization falls out and say, boy, that top one's nice, but it's going to take us all kinds of resources, whereas number 2 is more doable. How's that sound? Steve?
That's fine, but I actually had a question about one of the Bill's proposals. Again, the idea of maybe you modify it slightly depending on how you think about it. And that is, JWN, when they did their zone, they already set up some criteria. Did that get approved, the criteria of counting units by, they're over 3-bedroom?
There is a parking ratio that's based on bedrooms.
But I thought they had a,
Definition of density or something.
no, they didn't have a thing where they counted it as 2 units when it was over 3 bedrooms?
Steve,
For the purposes of parking.
if I may, I think rather than trying to, this is very general stuff.
Okay,
And I know
all right.
John was real concerned about how specific some proposals were, and his came in a general way.
Okay.
I think rather than trying to modify these, as we each go through prioritization, and we each think of these topics in our own individual ways, when they wash out, if they make it into the top 2 or 3 that we discuss on the 24th, that's when I think we have the discussion about how that might or might not be modified going into the work.
Okay, I was just trying to tell Bill that there may be something you should look at in advance to see if that influences you, how you.
Okay, Rick?
Just for clarity, Randy, you're suggesting we prioritize these based on just what we believe to be a level of importance
Whatever.
versus
Feasibility.
versus me, it was, again, my priority list would probably be different if I knew that John's proposal was going to take staff 2 weeks and 2 people and it's all done and everything else. It's another step if we have to go back through and take it through hearings and on and on and on, and it takes a lot of staff time. If you want to do it without that, I'm okay. I just want to make sure that, because as I read through those, I could see some of those taking a large amount of staff time to do, and other ones, to me, at least on the surface, seem to be fairly simple, almost just kind of fixes or tweaks to a code.
Well,
Yeah, almost housekeeping.
I went through and at least preliminarily prioritized my 10. And what I based that on was really 2 primary factors. One was how often have we heard from the public that a particular topic was an issue. And that rose those up to the top. And the second one was, are there work tasks in the Envision Eugene work program that these fit into? And that's kind of how I sifted through them. It wasn't so much is this going to be more or less resources and time involved, but rather how important have these issues been to the general public, and how do they fit into the Envision Eugene work program? And that's how I came to my conclusions. Bill?
Because I think, too, to tag on to that, my thought would be there may be something that is so important and so much of an issue that it might need to be addressed sooner rather than later, even if it does take a lot of extra staff time. And I'm not saying that, predisposing any idea here, but I think I'm comfortable prioritizing kind of outside of that aspect of it.
I'm okay. It seemed to me that it was important for us to sort of have some general guidelines so that we don't come in our next meeting and sit and spend half of it discussing which way we should have prioritized, because I did it completely different than what you did, and Steve did it different than John did, and we sit here and spend half our meeting discussing how we should have prioritized.
I think
I'm okay with that.
I think we base it on how important we as commission members feel the topic is, and then Carolyn will get her ability to say, great, we might agree with you, but can't do it this time around.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that, with coming to the May 6th meeting and weighing in on
Our own 1 to 10 scale.
our own 1 to 10, and resources is obviously going to factor into that.
But there may be something that we feel is really important. Staff says, this will take forever. We could discuss what we could do in the meantime to move it forward.
Yep.
So it
Sure we
won't
could,
get-
and we can have that discussion.
Yep.
If we come to the meeting on the 6th with our numbers already figured out, it'll take us a matter of 5 minutes to do the averaging, and then we can have the discussion, okay, what do we do on the 24th?
Gotcha.
How's that sound?
Okay.
So,
You're gone on the 6th.
That's where
So
I was
you-
going to go.
yeah.
So I won't be here on the 6th.
Oh.
I could give you my numbers, and probably a short write-up of what I'm proposing for the one that I submitted as well, so you have the benefit of that.
if you'd like.
Okay.
Yeah, otherwise, will you be here on the 20th? If yours rises to the top and is one of the 2 or 3, then certainly use your email on your cell phone on the river to find.
Oh, yeah, right.
On the sat phone, they work really well.
Yeah, and they're cheap, too.
Or mail it from.
By June 24th, that's not a problem.
Yeah, that's when I think it's important. Okay.
Black brackets my 2 big trips.
We're assuming they haven't closed the postal service office down at Phantom Ranch, so you can always mail it from
There you go.
Letter, not package, yeah.
So is that, I don't know, is there a motion and a second on the floor to move all 10 of these forward then?
Do we need to do that? I think we're
for-
agreeing that we're going to do that.
Well, yeah,
I
well, we
will
said.
move all 10 forward.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Okay, so all 10 go forward. The homework assignment, and I'll send this out in an email for John and Jeff's sake. Prioritize 10 is your first priority, 1 is your lowest priority. Come back on the 6th, add up the numbers, average them out, and then discuss where we want to go from there.
Okay.
Sorry, what's high, what's low?
10 points for the top priority, 1 point for the bottom priority.
And Randy, if you're going to send this sort of instruction out, would you send the packet of all that you have so that we all know that we've received everybody's work correctly?
I will send it again.
Did you send it once before? Was it?
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you.
March 18th.
It's the ones that-
4, 5,
See the one that circles on?
4, 9, 213.
We're having trouble with our email system.
8:10 a.m. on the 9th.
And he sent them based in order of receipt,
Right.
so there's no,
Steve?
I was going to suggest for the people that aren't here, and also it might be useful to list out some criteria that you might use, like how important to the public. In other words, criteria that we could consider as part of Envision Eugene. It's simple to implement, the difficulty of implementing, or staff time involved, whatever. In other words, we could send out a little short list of criteria that people might, it's up to the individual to decide how they're going to weigh those, but at least they have some criteria, so particularly for the people that aren't here, and if they don't.
Okay. A little bit of this discussion.
Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough?
Yep.
Okay. Any items from staff, Carolyn?
I've already covered them.
Commission members?
I just, Terry, can I see you after the meeting?
Oh. Okay, our next meeting is next week, LTD and the CIP. We're adjourned.